Matt. I'm one of the service techs here at 4-Wheel Camper, and today we're going to talk about a lift assist, how to properly do a lift assist. It's highly recommended that they get done here at the factory. There are a lot of variables that go into effect that are a little bit difficult. So there is some disclaimers involved in putting them on yourself. But I'm just going to go over kind of a roundabout, install for a lift assist. This is an external lift assist on a 2012 Eagle. So really, fleets and Eagles typically have a higher size liner, a taller folding panel. They get a 40-inch piston. Hawks, Granbys, Ravens get a 36-inch piston. So the piston depends on the length of the piston, depends on the camper. Like I said, this is for an Eagle, so it's going to get a 40-inch piston, so it's a little bit longer. I'm going to kind of show you what we do on the rear. The front on this one's a little bit different. There's some things we have to do on this one. We'll have to move the latches because they weren't positioned for lift assist on the front. So I'll show you that in a while. But right now we're just going to focus on the back and how we decide where we're going to mount it for this particular camper. Typically, if you get an install kit, a lift assist kit from us, you're going to get 4 pistons, and they come in usually two different poundage, 30 pounds and 40 pounds, and that depends on how heavy the roof is. This one doesn't have anything on the roof, so it's going to get 30-pound lift assist. So it gets 4 40-inch, 30-pound pistons, and then it gets, these are the top brackets. So this would be for the rear of the camper. This would be for the front of the camper. These are the top brackets that go on the roof trim, and these are the screws that go in those. And then these are the studs, the ball studs that go down at the bottom. And the bottom ball stud goes through the frame of the camper. So this goes inside the camper like that. And this goes outside of the camper through the frame. So basically it pulls into the frame. So that's the bottom ball stud. And then the front's a little bit different because it doesn't go through the frame, it just goes through the nose. So it doesn't need these shoulder bolts. It through bolts into the single nose frame. So the front's a little bit different than the back. But that's the general install kit that you get with the install. First thing I do usually is pop it up and figure out, make sure I have the right length piston. Like I said, this is for a 40-inch, get the 40-inch piston. And then what I usually do is just kind of hold it up and make sure that I've got enough angle to it. So the top bracket goes right up against the bracket, so it's going to go about right there. And so it's going to be at about that angle. And then the other side, you just want to make sure that it's not going to cross. So you have a space in the middle. So that's going to be my position for this one. If you're doing an older camper, sometimes the latches are in a different position. If they're over, you typically want to be at least like a minimum from the corner to the bracket. This one's going to be right up on the edge, but from the corner to the bracket is usually around 4 to 6 inches. You just don't want too far over because then it'll cross here, right? So if you do the 2 pistons, it's going to be like if you put them too far over, then you run out of, you don't want it to cross or be too close together. So you want it a little bit of a space in the middle there. So this one's going to be about just like that. So I know my pistons are going to work up against that bracket. So the next step I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the roof and I'll put in my top brackets and then I'll pop it back up and then put my pistons on and then adjust for my hole down the bottom. So I'm going to do that now. So I went ahead and dropped the roof. The next step is to take your top bracket and try to get it lined up. I take a Papermate pin or some type of marking device and mark your circles so that this is nice and flat and up against the bracket. And then I'll just mark it and then make my holes there. I had to take a screw out of the trim on this one to make this fit flush to the trim. So you want to make sure you seal any holes like that. You want to make sure you put some type of sealant on it. We use Siloprene for our external seals. You just put a little dab over that screw hole. Just kind of pat it down. That way there's no water finding its way in the frame of the camper. The other thing we do is we seal these screws as well. So they're pretty long screws. They go through the 1-inch tube into the 1.5-inch channel. So they're pretty long screws. What I do is put a little bit of the same seal I used on that screw hole. I'll put on these screws just so that when I drive it in, it seals and doesn't allow water to get into the frame. And then the bit's just a 5/16 bit that I put in the drill. And that's just going to go right on there and then right into those holes. These screws have a self-tapping head, so you don't have to pre-drill if you don't want to, because it'll self-tap its way into the frame. You can see it when I drive that screw and it kind of oozes that sealant out and seals so that there's no water getting in the top. And you just kind of rub that down the top so that that's got a nice seal to it, no water gets in. Going to do the same thing to the other side. Alright, so that's pretty much it for the top bracket. Just those screws and it's ready to pop back up. So now I'm going to pop it back up, put my pistons on, make my marks here, and then I'll explain how to drill through the frame. I'm ready to put in my pistons. They just pop on that ball stud that's on the top, so you just got to push them on. And it'll kind of snap in, locks into place with that seat clamp. And for now, I'll just let them rest right there on the door, the top of the door. And then what I do is I take this is just a marking pin that erases. It's like a Papermate pin that doesn't stay on the camper. I can wipe it right off after I'm done. And I take this and just slide this piece right up against the trim and just mark it. I outline the outside of the piston, or where the piston's going to be, like that. So that would be the maximum opening distance. But we want to put our holes for the ball studs a 1/2 inch out towards the edge of the camper. And the reason you don't want to put it right there maxed out, you want a little bit of pressure on this piston. So you, instead of putting it centered right here, what you do is you actually go a 1/2 inch in, which is like right about there. So that when you put the ball stud on there, there's pressure on this piston keeping the roof in the up position, and it's not maxed out. So basically that's the marks that you would put. Again, the outside mark is the maximum position, or the inside mark is the maximum position. The outside mark is where you want to put your hole. And then I'll just grab the washer that we use for those ball studs. So that's just a little small washer because it fits inside the trim. And I'll just put that like right about there on my line. I'll just make a little circle. I usually try to put the washer about 1/8 of an inch down from the trim, just so I know I'm not so far up on the inside. So I'll do the same thing over here, about 1/8 of an inch up. Mark my circle. So that's where my ball studs are going to be on the bottom. One other thing you want to check before you drill is when the roof is in the closed position, you want to make sure that the piston's not going to bottom out, right? So what you want to do is measure. What you want is the maximum, or when it's closed all the way, it's got to be, it can't be, you have to have a minimum distance of whatever that point is right there, which is 22.5 on this. So you have to have at least 22.5 inches when it's closed, because this would be down and closed. You need at least that much. There's usually not an issue in the back of the camper. There's usually always enough space because of the angle of the piston. In the front, on this one, I'm going to show you what happens when it doesn't work that way. So on the front, there's something else we have to do, but on the back, you just want to make sure that when it's, and you can mark it like here. So closed position, the piston with that top piston would be about here. You need a minimum of that 22.5 from here to here, so that the piston doesn't bottom out. So if the angle's not right, then you have issues where it could bottom out. So you need, if for some reason this piston was put in too far over, then you can see your closing distance will be shorter, and the piston might bottom out. That's why those pistons have to be out far enough so that it doesn't bottom out when it closes. So this one we got plenty of room. I got like 24.25, 24.5 from here to here, and all I need is 22. So I know I've got enough closure distance from here to here, and my marks are good, so I can go ahead and drill that hole. I like to center punch that hole so it doesn't travel on me when you're drilling the hole. So I just take a center punch tool and just center punch that skin so that the drill bit doesn't travel. So I just center punch that like that, just a little bit, and then do the same thing there. That way when I drill my hole, it's not going to move. The outside edge is a 5/16 hole, and that's so that this ball stud will go in. So it has to be a 5/16 going through the outside edge. On the inside edge, this shoulder bolt has to go in. So the inside edge hole is a little bit bigger. The inside hole is 3/8. So I'll drill all the way through with the 5/16, and then after my hole's drilled all the way through, I'll go in and drill the inside edge to a 3/8 so that the shoulder bolt goes in the opposite side. So the inside edge is a little bit bigger hole than the outside edge. This one gets drilled all the way through. You gotta be real careful at this point when you're drilling, because there is wires that come up and go into the channel. So it's really important to be really careful when you're drilling this hole, that you just barely drill through the skin and the outside frame. You don't want to push that drill bit in too far, because if you nick a wire, it could short out the lights and cause some electrical issues. So when you're drilling this, just kind of nice and slow and easy. Like that was probably harder than I want, but you can see that hole right there has got a wire in it. So you want to go really slow so that you don't nick that wire. So as long as you go nice and slow and easy, you're okay. If you try to drill all the way through, you could mar up that wire pretty good. So you want to go nice and slow if you can. just like that. And you can see that hole doesn't have the wire showing, so that one's okay. The best thing to do is, even if you don't see a wire, is take a flashlight and just shine that light in there. And you can see that's got a green wire, and even the black wires behind it. This one here, the wires are laying down more at the bottom of the frame. So this one you could drill all the way through pretty safely. This one, you got to be real careful of. You want to try and get that wire pushed down a little bit. And there's a little trick that I like to use. I take a piece of duct tape, just regular duct tape, and make a couple of strips out of it. And then roll the duct tape up so the sticky side is kind of like that. And you can use, it doesn't have to be duct tape. You can use like a beetle tape or some kind of sticky tape or something to stick it. But all I'm doing is trying to get that wire stuck up or down. So I'll take a pick and try to get those wires either pushed all the way up or pushed all the way down. So basically all this is doing is kind of putting a little bit of something in there to get those wires up in the frame. If you shine that in there now, you can see that wire's gone. So you shine the light in there, just make sure the wires are clear. This one worked out really good with just one little piece of tape. So I'm good to go ahead and drill all the way through now. So the same drill bit, just all the way through, 5/16 hole all the way through. Okay, so 5/16 drill bit comes out. 3/8 inch drill bit goes in the drill, and that's for the shoulder bolt that's on the inside. So I'm going to go on the inside. Get a picture of the 5/16 holes there. That's the inside of the camper. Perfect. And then we're going to take this 3/8 bit. And this bigger hole just goes through the inside edge of the frame. You don't want to take the big drill bit and go all the way through. So it needs to be 5/16 on the outside and then 3/8 inch hole on the inside. And that's so that this shoulder bolt here just slides in the hole. I'm going to put a washer on it first, but fits in this hole nice and snug. And that's the shoulder bolt pushes in. I want to put a big fender washer on there to give myself a little bit of grab, but the big hole is on the inside for the shoulder bolt like that. So I'm going to go out and grab a big washer and then put the ball studs in there. This is the outside ball stud, and it's just got the small washer because it goes on the top of the door. I do the same thing I do on the top, is I seal this so that no water gets in the camper in the frame. So I just put a little bead around this, like that. And the shoulder bolt goes in the hole with the big washer, the big fender washer, like that. And then on the outside, I'm gonna go ahead and wipe. I don't need those lines anymore, so I'm gonna take those off before I put my studs in there. And then the sealed ball stud with the washer just screws into that shoulder bolt. And then the sealer will kick out it and seal that hole really good. And And then it's just a 3/8 inch or a 7/16 deep socket for the outside, and then I just hold it with a Phillips screwdriver on the inside, and then just tighten this up. It just needs to be nice and snug, and you don't have to over tighten it. It's just going to crush if you over tighten it. So just nice and snug. And then you have to wipe off this, make it look better. This side's pretty much done. It's tight, sealed. And you can see it's a 1/2 inch in, so you have to literally push up on this piston to get it to mount, and then it just pops in there, and that way there's tension on that piston holding the roof in the up position. So I'm going to do the same thing to this side. Shoulder bolt goes through the big hole on the inside. Like that. And then sealed small washer and ball stud on the outside. Up. Same thing, push the piston in, and that's it. The back is done. I always like to check it to make sure before I move on to the front. Just close it real quick to make sure it closes good. And that's pretty much it through the back. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Sometimes if you got the old style gutters here, we're using a newer style gutter. You don't want this gutter hitting the piston too much. If you have to, you can bend this up a little bit. This one's just barely touching, so it's probably going to be okay. But if it's touching too much, you can just bend this lip up a little bit. Or you can take the trim off and cut it and shorten it up if you want to, if it's really touching a lot. But this one's pretty good. So I'm going to go ahead and pop it back up and then start working on the front. Okay, so now we're doing the front. And like I said back there was going to be some issues where the piston, because it's a 40-inch piston, that it might cross, and this one crosses, which means I have to move my latches. You know, back in the day, and again, there's lots of different variables that you have to think about before you're putting these on. Back in the day, the latches were in more, so they weren't made for external lift assist, so there's not enough room for this to go in without it crossing in the middle, right? So if you put it like I did in the back up against the bracket, they can't cross, right? So on this one, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to move the latches and then seal the holes. And typically on this one, what I try to do is try not to make too many holes. If I can get away with not moving this whole bracket like over here, typically what I'll do is I'll take these 4 screws out and just move this latch over, put this over to here, right? And use those same 2 holes, and then all I have to do is seal 2 holes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move both of my latches over to this set of holes, and then not make any holes, new holes in the camper, until I check to see if my pistons are going to work in that position. Again, some of the older campers, you know, if that's still not enough room out, then you may have to move it over even more. But typically before making extra holes, I try to move it over to this set first. So what I'm gonna do is take these 4 out, move this over, put those 2 screws back in, and not make any holes until I can figure out if it'll work. So she's gonna video, and I'm just gonna move these over, and then I'll show you what the pistons look like after I move them. I'm gonna do the same thing to the other side. So now I haven't made any new holes. I'm just in the same hole. It's just moved over. And then I'll have to take that bracket off and move it over as well. And then seal those holes and seal these holes. And then after I get both sides done, then I'll check it again. As long as the putty tape comes off in really good condition, I usually don't worry about resealing those holes, but you can see it's got a sealed putty tape on it. And if it looks like that, it's okay to just put it right back on. If the putty tape's not in really good shape, you might want to add some type of sealant to those screws. But this one's going to be okay for now. I'm just going to take those, put them right back in. So my bottom bracket's removed, so now I'm going to close the roof and move my top brackets over. I'll have to remove that screw. This screw will have to come out for this to go in. This just needs to go in like right there. I'll just have to remove that screw first and seal that hole. So before you make any new holes, if you want to check it first, what you can do is just mark it. You know, figure out that's going to be right about there, up and down. So what I'll do is mark this. And mark this. And then take the top bracket, put it right up against there, like that. And then mark this, and then I always mark a little spot right there where this ball stud would be. So basically that's where my bracket would be. So my latch bracket's there, this would be there. So that way I'm not drilling a bunch of holes and then find out it doesn't work. So I'll mark everything first and then check it to see if it's enough room moving outward so that they don't cross. So that's all marked and ready to go. So that's pretty much where it puts that. So at this point, like I said, before drilling any holes, I'm gonna pop it up and just see how my pistons fit in there. So I just line up that top mark with that spot, and then mark this down here. And that's, again, just like the back, that's my maximum point. See how close it is. It's pretty much right, they pretty much come together like right in the middle. But what you got to remember is it's going to come back a half an inch on both sides, right? And then you do the same mark here. And then measure. So what you need to make just like the back, it needs to be a minimum distance from here to there, so that when it closes, it doesn't bottom out. So I'm gonna grab my tape measure. And just make sure I have my minimum distance of closing, like that center at about 22. I usually like 22 and a half, but you know, you get away with like 22 and an eighth, give or take. So if my ball stud is there a half an inch in and there a half an inch in, then I measured my closed position from that point to that point, and you can see it's going to be 22 and 3/4. So when it closes, when the roof's down, it will fit where I marked everything. It's going to come down to pretty close to bottoming out, but there should be about a 3/8 of an inch safety space there. So this one's going to be close, but it's going to work. If you had to, you could move the whole bracket over, but I don't need to on this one because it's going to fit. So now that I know it's going to fit by marking it, I'll drop the roof again and then add my screws back into my brackets. You know, add my 4 screws here and add all my screws up there. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop it and start adding all those back and getting that top part all set up. Wiped everything down and cleaned everything up. These holes are gonna get like filled, you know, or sealed at least. These holes aren't gonna get, they're probably gonna get covered with the bracket, so I'll seal those. These I usually put rivets in just to seal them, and then put a dab of sealant over the top of it. But basically what I'm going to do right now is just add the screws to this. To make it a little bit easier, I'll probably pre-drill this just to make it a little bit easier on myself, because the screws are not self-tapping on these. So I'll just take a really small drill bit and just pre-drill this. So on the backing of this, there's nothing in the frame you have to worry about. The wires are on the back you have to worry about. In the front, there's nothing in here or down here you have to worry about, unless it's a really old, like, you know, 90s-ish camper. Sometimes the older campers had wires in the top frame, but I've only seen like very few, 1 or 2 that were like that. So I typically don't really worry about wires in the front at all.
For mid-size models.
Yeah, mid-size and even the bigger models. pre-drilled as well. The top bracket, when it goes in, after we screw it down, we seal around the outside edge of this, so you don't have to put sealant in the screws. But this one had a roof screw in the middle, so I'll put a little dab of sealant over that one. And these are going to get covered too, but I'll still put a little dab over those. And then these need to be sealed up as well. What we do here is we put rivets in that hole and just so that it plugs in. So we'll just put a rivet in there.
Could that also be just like a pop rivet?
Yeah, just a pop rivet, hand rivet gun, or it doesn't even have to be a rivet. You can put sealant over it. It's just the rivet kind of helps it seal better. I'm still gonna put on the rivet, so the rivet just kind of fills because it's a pretty good sized hole. So what I'll do is put a little dab over the rivet as well. This bracket can go on now, and it's just like the back, right up against the bracket, flat with the top of the trim. Make a couple of lines where the screw's going to be. Do the same thing, just kind of center punch that. And then the same thing, just like we did in the back, put some sealant on the screws. You know, water's always an issue, so I always add on the front, because of the old bracket, I pulled up some sealant there. I'll put a little dab all the way along the top. then along the top of this, and then down this one side. Like that. So that side's all completely set up. Again, you don't have to worry about any wires up here or down here. The latch is moved over, the top moved in place, everything's sealed and really good. I'm going to do the exact same thing to the other side, and then we'll pop it up and mark our bottom piston. On the front, for this particular camper, we're going to go on the bottom of the trim because it's a taller camper. There are, again, so many different variables to the lift assist. You know, Hawks and Granbys have a taller nose. Sometimes it will go underneath the light on a Hawk and Granby. For a short period of time, the light was right in the middle. Sometimes it's above the light. So again, there's different variables as far as positioning of this piston. On this one, it's going to go down the bottom. That one's there. You can see how close this one is going to be. But again, that's in the maxed out position. And again, I'll mark the center of this one. And the center of this one, and go back a ½ inch. On the front, I like to use the bigger washer. Just gives it more of a better seal, a little bit stronger, because it's only going through one layer of aluminum. It's going through the single layer of the frame. So that's, I'm going to come back a ½ inch, which is right there, back a ½ inch. Make sure, again, there's no wires in there. There's no wires in the top and the front, but occasionally there is some wires running down in here. They're usually tucked up a little bit higher, but I always pull the carpet out and then make sure there's no wires in there. Then mark my hole and drill it. Then take your washer and your stud and just kind of put it in there like that. We'll do the same thing to the other side. At this point, it kind of takes two people because somebody has to go in, because it's just going through one layer of aluminum. So on the inside edge, it's just getting a washer and a nut on the front. So at this point, I'll get somebody to tighten it up from the outside. I'll go on the inside, put my nut and washer on it, and then we'll just tighten it up. Okay, so I've got a partner inside holding the nut and the washer on the inside. Out here it's the same thing, 7/16. Okay, Alex, here we go. Okay, that's good. Go ahead and hold the other side. It's all sealed and tightened. Just gonna go ahead and put my piston on. Gotta pull back a little bit. Snap that on. Make sure they're both locked in position. And that's a done front end installation on the Eagle 2012. I'll close it now and make sure nothing bottoms out. And you can see how close it is. I'll close it right now. You can see in the closed position how close it is here. That's why your measurements have to be just right, because you don't want those to bottom out. That's why we had to move the latch, otherwise it would have been too close. If you have to, you can move the latch over further if you needed to, but this one worked out just right. Closes really good, and we're gonna have a happy camper whose roof will open much easier for them.